This is First Up with Kane Corns. I'm Sarah, Olle and Kane. We head straight to the MCG, where the only thing wilder than today's Melbourne weather was the finish between the Giants and the D's. Lockie Keefe, in the end, the unlikely hero, after being monstered all day by Max Gawn. In the end, it was a 3-point win to the visiting team.
Yeah, I thought it was a great game of footy in really tough conditions, as you said. And in the end, the toughest and most organised team won that game of footy. But to kick two back half transition goals in the last quarter, so it was 3-1 in the last quarter. That man, Finn Callaghan, was just enormous once again. He had 9 in the last quarter. He had the 4 score involvements. He was involved in everything in his run and carry. That kick from Cadman was just beautiful to Toby, who was also enormous in the last quarter. He had 11 in the last quarter and 4 score involvements in that goal there. So if that wasn't bad enough for Simon Goodwin, then Finn Callaghan comes off and he goes to Adam Kingsley. What am I doing?
He's right, though, right?
Why am I 100% he's right. And I think King has handled it really well. So he's stalking the coach here on the interchange bench, walking up and down saying, get me back on. You can see the time there. And he did get back on. And he got back on at the right time, because have a look at this gather in the middle of the ground. How smart, how tough this is. He just wanted it more, willed himself, got it out. And the veteran Callum Ward, this kick here to Lockie Keefe, as you said, was so smart, because Gorm was back in the hole, and then an unlikely hero. Did you think that was going through?
I'll put my hand up and say absolutely not. Was it on your bingo card, Kane?
I was about to text you in the WhatsApp and say, he's no chance of kicking this. He hit it so sweetly and through it went, and then the Giants held on. Their only game at the MCG, which is an absolute disgrace. But how important is this win for them when you look at the amount of travel that they've got? Their home ground is being used for other things, but that's what it looks like. Their next 8 games, Sarah, there's one game at home. They get the rough end of the stick more than any other team, and the Victorian teams just don't know how good they've got it when you look at one game at the G and that record in the next 8 games.
It certainly makes it tough indeed, but they've shown that they can do it. Adam Kingsley's side, Kane. Just a word on the D's before we move on. They lost today, but I don't think they lost any friends, did they? I loved the exuberance of youth. We saw the 6 fresh faces, the 5 debutants, and I thought that Xavier Lindsay, with his cleanliness, really exemplified all of that.
Yeah, they love him. They just think he's so composed. And didn't he use the ball well today? I've always really liked their group of under 24s, and there's some not in the side at the moment. Losing Stephen May hurt, because they pride themselves on doing those disciplined things and defending really well. So to concede those 2 transition goals in the wet late, Simon Goodwin would be furious with that. And there was a few times where they fumbled in the goal square, coughed up easy goals. So it was a really strong performance, but it's a flattening one, because they were in a position, halfway through that last quarter where they just should have been winning that game of footy.
Speak of flattening, and St Kilda was just that earlier in the day at Adelaide Oval. They got a shellacking. They were 63-point losers in the end to Matthew Nick's side, and really they just invited the home crowd in early. We know how parochial it can be there, and they conceded the first 5 goals. It wasn't pretty for Ross Lyon's side.
No, it wasn't. You know a team's really struggling when you see how many walk-in goals the opposition kicked. So Adelaide kicked 3 goals from the goal square, essentially like half a metre out, and a lot of those came in the first quarter. So I think Ross Lyon needs to drive this group harder. That's just not good enough. To be able to give that goal up early in the game is so deflating. We'll see another one here on the boundary line. Missed tackle, walk-in goal. How deflating is that? It's from half a metre out, and that happened so often. They kicked 11 goals from inside 30 metres. There's the captain v captain. Steele v Dawson. Who wants that more?
Not pretty.
Jack Steele just can't go with him, and Jordan Dawson, who is a star of the competition, goes, I'm going to bury this from 60. So deflating. So I think Ross has an issue with trying to be a bit too nice. They got him to be the hard, demanding, high standard setting coach that we know him for. He hasn't been that in my time, certainly from what I'm witnessing from the outside, and he's letting this group off with efforts, and this is always going to be a talking point, Sarah. You can see their numbers from last year. They hate talking about it. They'll say, oh, no, we moved the ball fast off half-back, and who cares? You can't score. That was your average last year. You were 15th, and today wasn't much better.
That's last year, but what about today? Do we give them a little bit of an out? Because personnel issues, I mean, they've got some stars out, Kane, in terms of Max King, Mateus Philippou, even Mitch Owens and a Liam Henry. These are players that could provide a fair bit of spark and scoring prowess.
No doubt, and that hurts, but Max King doesn't ever play a full season. So there's to say that he's injured, well, he's always injured, so I'm not sure you can rely on him. But the efforts that I showed in that first little package there has nothing to do with personnel. That's simple tackle or simple get the ball over the boundary line and go to a throw-in and set up the ground. So you've really got to drive those things hard regardless of the personnel. And when you've been telling everyone throughout the off-season that we're young, don't get your expectations up, they haven't said it in so many words, but we're hearing it, then no one's really expecting them to be good. And they looked every bit a bottom four side as we probably predicted in the pre-season.
Well, let's hear from St Kilda coach Ross Lyon.
We've got a lot of work to do, but we know that. I mean, we've been really competitive for final series, but we've got to keep building. The Crows have been building for 6 years, so, they've got their challenges like we all have. Yeah, our ability to defend them and the ground was not at the level that's required or I'm used to delivering. So coaches and players have got a bit of work to do.
I liked that bit where he said that I'm used to delivering. And that's a little bit about the high standards that I said that I think he's just backed off a bit. He feels like he's just, I don't want to offend anyone. I want to make sure we can recruit players. I want to make sure it's a happy environment so players want to join our footy club. No, what makes you great is that you are, expected to deliver those things like you always have. And I think he's gone away from that.
Has he lost his edge at all, Kane? And I guess a follow-up to that question is, on the eve of the season, the Saints, they did re-sign him, extending him to 2027. I mean, should they have done that?
Well, I'm not sure about those strategies. Each club seems to be really paranoid about having a coach on a short tenure. The Western Bulldogs are the only ones that are sort of embracing it, which I like. Now, Ross needs some time, there's no doubt about that, but there's certainly been a language change at that club because when he took over, the list was better than what they've delivered. They were expecting to drive them up the ladder. And if I hear one more time that they played in a final in 2023, I'm going to pull my hair out. I couldn't care less. You lost a final in 2023. It's now 2025, and you look every bit of bottom four side. So can we stop mentioning 2023? Please, Ross, I urge you to stop mentioning that. It's driving me insane.
I mean, that was the bad, potentially even the ugly. But let's get to the good and really the sublime with the Crows today. I loved watching them. I thought they were electric, and 12 individual goal kickers. Kane, they just look so potent up forward. And also there was moving of the magnets as well from Matthew Nicks.
They're the real deal. Yeah, Adelaide are the real deal. So these positional changes. So Dawson, midfield, centre forward, and that's where all the best midfielders play. That's where Petrarca plays, that's where Heaney plays, that's where when De Goey's fit he's play, that's where Dustin Martin plays. That's another added bonus for Adelaide if you can do that. We know Rankin's gone into the midfield, but he hardly went forward today. He was majority midfield, so that's going to be a huge bonus for them if he can stay fit. His ability to win the footy inside and then get out. Saligo had 29 today. We know that he's really emerging, and then Rankin does this from the midfield. And the other one that I liked was Rory Laird going back to halfback. The experienced head back there, good ball user, sound head on his shoulders, out of the midfield because they were a little bit one-dimensional in the last couple of years with Crouch and Laird in that midfield together. So Matthew Nicks has really done a good thing by revitalising the group, as well as Neil Bullen comes in and Pete Lingan coming. They're going to be handy, but those magnets of their key players really paid off today.
You just said off the top of talking about the Crows, they're the real deal. What does the real deal mean?
I think they're capable of playing in a prelim final. I really do. Now, not an overreaction on what we saw today because you would expect a lot of teams to beat up on the Saints, but they do have their game in good order. And if they got a bit boring last year with their ball movement, they played a bit safe. And I don't think they'll do that. There's a bit more flair in the lineup personnel-wise. They're tough. They're really tough. They're contested. They pressure the opposition. So their game is in really sound order. And then you let your star players go to work. You let Thilthorpe dominate forward of the ball. You kick to him in a contest because he'll win them. Same with Fogarty. The only query they would have, and Taylor Walker was subbed out today, there's a hard conversation to be had with Taylor Walker. He's not in their best 22. He's a good depth player for them now, but it's Thilthorpe and Fogarty's forward line. We saw that today with him getting subbed out. So that's the tricky one for Matthew Nicks on how he handles a champion of the footy club.
So round one, it's just concluded in the West. The Travelling Suns, we know that was an issue for them last year. They come up against the Eagles. Not so much of an issue today, Kane. Got a bit ugly towards the end, really.
Didn't it what? This is the first half numbers. Look at that. That is an absolute smashing. So game over quarter time, game over at half time, plus 23 contested, plus 9 in ground balls, plus 17 in clearances, and plus 23 in entries. So Anderson, Rao and Miller, you've heard those names before, haven't you? The usual suspects. 29 clearances between those three. The whole of the West Coast side had 33. So the whole West Coast side had 4 more clearances than those 3 stars from Gold Coast. Great start from them. Ben King was on fire forward. Their halfbacks, Noble and Rioli, did exactly what they thought they would. Yep, it's the Eagles, but a big relief to get a big win on the biggest and longest road trip in football where they've struggled.
For the Eagles, there were alarming signs, I guess you could couch it, Kane, early. And you want to highlight an incident involving one of the more inexperienced players, it must be said.
Yeah, Dewar's only played 8 games, okay? So we get that, but look at him there. So I'll pause it there. Miller's going to mark this footy. So Dewar's got his back to the play. No one is directing him. No one's talking to him. No one's instructing him. No one's saying, hang on, Took Miller might be in a dangerous spot here, and then look, and as he marks the ball, Dewar's still got his back to the play. Now we can accept you getting beaten, there's no doubt, and West Coast are going to get beaten, and they're going to get beaten badly on occasions. You cannot accept that, even for an 8-game player. So that was one of many clips I could have shown, but when that happens, that's a sign that you're just not there. And that's early in the first quarter where you are fresh, there's no fatigue, first game of the season, you should be switched on. So they just can't be accepting efforts like that.
I mean, is it unfair to be picking on him, or is it emblematic of a much bigger problem, do you think, at the club?
Yeah, no, it's the broader conversation about the footy club, and it's the teammates around him. It speaks to a lack of leadership. It speaks to players worrying about themselves. Like the best teams, turn the footy over. All right, where's my teammate going to go? Make sure he's not too close to me. He's going to knock off that dangerous space. If there's a player that needs to be shut down, they will do that, and they communicate as one. And I mean, that's where the Eagles need to get to, because that takes no talent. That doesn't take any talent. It doesn't take high draft picks, nothing. It just takes, players being switched on. So that's a concern. And the coach spoke at quarter time, Sarah, and he was pretty upset with what he saw.
It's pretty simple. We're minus 23 in the contest, so it's not acceptable. We'll never be able to compete in games unless we improve that.
Yeah, I guess welcome to the big time mini, and it doesn't get any easier, Kane, because next week they travel to the Gabba to take on the reigning premier in Brisbane. I just wonder, what did you make of Harley Reed's match? Of course, he's always going to garner plenty of attention. There are a few theatrics today, I thought.
There was. I'm worried about him. Yeah, not worried about him long term. He's going to get there, and in 5-6 years' time, this stuff is going to be out of his game. But the sooner it gets out of his game, the better. Like, that's unacceptable. Like, that's an embarrassing effort for
Well, he's
Harley
just better
Reed.
than that, isn't he?
He is. And the problem now for him, and I speak to the lack of leadership. Remember Elliot Yeo was sort of looking after him last year and coming in and protecting him in his first year. Elliot Yeo is not there. So teams have a target on his back. Not only physically, because they know he is susceptible to that, they know he will bite back, they know there's a risk that he'll get reported or give away free kicks, but also there's a target on his back because he's not fit enough yet, and he hasn't had an interrupted pre-season, that they start on him at stoppage and then they expose him the other way. And there's a couple of clips that we could have shown on Anderson and Rao. I mentioned the 29 clearances between those 3 Gold Coast gun midfielders that often would start on Reed and then get away from him. So he's got a lot of work to do. And talk of him being a $2 million player and all of that, and back page of the paper and the press, he's nowhere near that. And he's nowhere near the player that he needs to be. He had 4 touches in the first half, 2 kicks, and it was a really ordinary first up performance from him, albeit it's his second year. I get it. It's harsh criticism, but we expect more from a player who we know is capable of a lot more than that.
I feel like that was the perfect entree for the main. It's time for Volcano.
Sometimes you go, which is going to be the volcano this week? But this week was pretty easy. And it's my old side, who were humiliated once again at the MCG by Collingwood, who had come off a poor performance. Now, the contest work is what I want to highlight here. Josh Shin's got the football, coughs it up. Ollie Wines, a Brownlow medalist, has got long, a far inexperienced player to Ollie Wines. And then they're away. Port Adelaide had 2 opportunities to get that ball over the boundary line or win a contest. Finlayson presses when he doesn't need to, and Tim Membry gets his game up and going. This isn't a replay. This is a different clip. You got the ball, Logan Evans. Jackson Mead, get the ball over the boundary line once again, and then an easy free kick over the boundary line. That's a different clip. And then they're going to chip it inside to that. Like, the lack of effort, the lack of strength. I thought they were weak, and this clip's alarming. So my favourite player is Jason Horne-Francis, but he won't want to see this. So Nick Dacos was back to his best. Look where they are, right there, Horne-Francis and Dacos together. Guess who's going to kick this goal? You wouldn't believe it. but Nick Dacos, who was cramping at halftime last week, bobs up inside forward 50. Horn-Francis, you see him right there at the top of 50, did not move from that position where he was side by side with Nick Dacos. If Jason Horn-Francis wants to be the player that we think he can be, he's got to get better. And Finlayson there at the top of the screen, I'm not sure what he was doing. I think he was still reading the advertiser and they were singing his praises from a 30-possession pre-season game against St Kilda 2 weeks ago. This was a disgraceful performance, and to make matters worse, they waited for Dan Houston to finish the post-game interview with the host broadcaster, and they waited on the ground to shake his hand. This is a player that broke his contract to leave their footy club, copped a 6-week suspension, missed the finals for them, let them down in that space, then said he's going to go and break a contract, play for another club. He's best on ground in his first game against his old side, and they thought it was a good idea to stick around and shake his hand for 5 minutes after the game. I can't believe it, and I was embarrassed watching my team, and I hope they watch that vision back, because there was 4 clips. I could have shown 30.
I mean, chill, boy, but is your team too nice? Is that what you're saying?
Well, they were then. I mean, they've got to look at that. They look so out on their feet, and I know it's the first game, and I know Collingwood have played. They've got to look at their conditioning program, the amount of times that they lost contests. They've got to look at their strength program and what is happening in the gym, because they just looked like it was a men against boys type of situation. And then they need to look at their skill, because they turned the footy over. They couldn't cope with Collingwood's pressure. Now, granted, Collingwood were unbelievable. Like, if they bring that level of pressure like they did, they're gonna be a really good side, like we know that they can be. So you've got to give them their dues. But yeah, it was, as I said off the top, humiliating.
Let's get to the temperature test. Thanks to Sportsbet, let's see where everyone is ranking. And despite being an 0-2, the Swans, you've got them as still running hot. But Kane, simmering, the Tigers. I mean, that was one of the best wins of the home and away season ever. I think they're still celebrating on Swan Street.
Yes, no, I agree with you. It was one of the best home and away wins I've ever seen. But I don't think that is going to last. So I'm forecasting, you jump up a level from frozen, but I think it's still going to be a 3-4 type win season for Richmond at best. Up the top, they're the best teams in it right now. Adelaide probably, I'm judging them harshly because I just want to see it against a good side. But Hawthorn, Brisbane, Geelong, the Giants and the Suns, they're on a different level to everyone else at the moment. Sydney's 2 losses, but they've been really good and could have beaten the reigning premiers in that game if not for some things going their way. I think Essendon, on where we expected them to be, were pretty good. They've got to tidy up a few little things. Melbourne was strong. Collingwood bounced back and go up a couple of rungs after what we saw a fortnight ago. And then there's the rest. But the big story was Carlton. And we'll see how they can regroup this week and whether it was a once-off or whether this is going to be an alarming trend for Michael Voss and the Blues.
Our colleague Riley Beveridge describing it as the worst loss in 30 years for Carlton. So let's see if they can bounce back. And Kane, we'll see you next week as well on First Up with Kane Corn. See you then.
Can't wait, Sarah.
What's gambling really costing you? For free and confidential support, call the number on the screen or visit the website.